concept in your own training. Okay, first of all, who made the MRV concept? Dr. Mike Israetel made the MRV concept, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so now we have some important definitions and acronyms. Maintenance volume, which stands for MV. MEV, which is minimum effective volume. MAV, maximum adaptive volume. MRV, maximum recoverable volume. We have volume in resistance training is going to be sets times reps times weight, or also we can calculate it in total amount of sets per body part. Now, we have a deload. A deload is a time of lower volume, intensity, or both that becomes vital for training. Deloads provide ample time to recover from stress of weeks prior to repair joints and tendons. So it's basically a week where you have this low volume phase where you're still training to get your skills up to par, get your technique working, but all the volumes are lowered so that you can recover while you train. Now, what are we talking about when we say recovery? Well, recovery means that you retain original state of health, mind, strength, and performance. Strength and performance is underlined because that's what we're focusing on. Now, what are we recovering from? We're recovering from fatigue. Fatigue is a term used to describe the inhibition of maximal performance that comes about as a result of stressors imposed on the athlete. From week to week, your volume is going to rise. Doing this is going to put fatigue on you. Fatigue is going to mask your performance. So the fatigue is very important in weight training. Now, first we start off with maintenance volume. Now, this is the volume that you can do to stay the same. Staying the same meaning not grow, but just retain your strength and your size. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, periods of lower volume are important, so your growth process is refreshed to maximum effectiveness. You can do this by staying around 70% of a 1 rep max and about half of the volume of your MRV. We're going to talk about MRV and the ranges of. So maintenance volume is finding a volume that after a mesocycle, which is about 4 to 6 weeks of training, you can still hit the rep range that you used to when you started the cycle. Now, when we're talking about rep range, the easiest way to get these numbers or these landmarks of volume are with a rep test. A rep test meaning that you will grab an exercise, let's say the bench press, and you're gonna do around 70% of your 1 rep max for as many reps as you can. Now this number is gonna quantify how strong you are at that point. And now we test this number usually after a mesocycle that has been done, a deload has been taken, and then you test again. Why? Because that's when performance is supposed to be at your peak, or you're well rested, and then this is how we judge muscle size and muscle strength, along with other coordinators such as weight and pictures and whatnot. Now, the example I have here is at the beginning of the mesocycle, an athlete lifted 200 pounds on the bench press for 15 reps. At the end of his maintenance block of training, he was able to repeat the same cycle, meaning he was able to lift 200 pounds on the bench press for 15 reps again, meaning that he didn't lose strength and he didn't gain it, he stayed the same. Now we go on to minimum effective volume. Now this is the amount of volume in training you can do that you can grow with. Anything below will maintain or lose muscle. So if you're training to increase muscle size, you must train in the range of MEB or above. Now, the key word is minimum. It's the minimum of training that you can do to make gains. You will make these gains as slow as possible if you're training with the MEV landmark. This volume landmark grows higher and higher the more you train. Why? Because once you get to an intermediate stage or past the beginner stage, your volume, the most that you can do to actually have a stimulus in your muscles is going to grow. That's why this number is going to grow and more. Same thing with your maintenance volume. Your maintenance volume is going to grow again, but not as much. Why? Because maintenance volume is not something that you need a stimulation to grow. It's something that you need to stay the same or just retain what you have. Now, this is a good place to start your training and progress in volume the following weeks. I believe you should not start your training in your maintenance volume. Why? Because we know that range is not going to keep you at a stimulus high enough to grow. That's why we use the minimum effective volume. So the example I have here is if you're a beginner, your maintenance volume and minimum effective volume will be almost the same because beginners will grow from any kind of volume. However, your MEV increases far more than your maintenance volume as you start training and get into the intermediate stages of training. Now we go on to a maximal adaptive volume. This is the range of volumes which you measure your best gains, where you grow the most muscle between this volume. Now, MAV will change after every training cycle, like MRV if you surpass it. Now you're saying, if this is the best range, why do we have minimum effective? Why do we have maintenance? Why can't you just skip to this range? Well, if you skip to this range, it's gonna be very high for you to start off, and now you're gonna only have to keep this around maybe 2 to 3 weeks until you can't even provide like an overload to your system again. You're gonna have to take a deload after 2 to 3 weeks. Why? Because it's so much volume right off the bat. You're going from 100, like 0 to 100, and then you don't have much place to grow. Now, every time you're training hard, the amount of volume you need to keep progressing increases to a point where you can't recover anymore. This is where I was talking about. We have to progressively get to this maximum adaptive volume, and with that, we reach our MRV, which is gonna come up next. Now, the range of your maximal adaptive volume will be between your maximal effective volume, your minimal effective volume, and your maximal recoverable volume. So what is your MRV? What is this big concept that we've been talking about for this, what this whole concept is? It's the most individual can train and still recover. What do we mean by recovery? Recovery means retain original state of health, mind, strength, or performance. Again, we're emphasizing strength and performance because this is for muscle growth. Now, we're recovering from fatigue like we spoke about. Now, how do we find this? Now, we work our way up in volume through each phase of training. This is called the accumulation phase. Then we're going to record our responses. We're going to know how many total sets per body part were done the week before you were unable to recover. This is going to be like you have your training logged, clean and precise. You see how much you're doing. Okay, last week I couldn't recover. I did 200 pounds for 8 reps and I didn't have any left. There's no way that I'm getting weaker through all this training, but fatigue has masked your fitness at this point. So when you're so fatigued that your recovery process is halted, your performance will decrease. Therefore, one can infer that last week the volume that was done is going to be close to the athlete's MRV. It's not always going to be a perfect number, but we have these landmarks of ranges where we can clearly tell when you've been recovering and when you're making your best gains. This is what all the MRV concept is about. It's about landmarks and ranges of volumes. So once you don't recover your rep strength from week to week, you can't continue to provide the overload to push muscle gain along. And once you find your MRV, it is no longer your MRV. You must work past that. Why? Because your body has adapted to you working up to that volume. Therefore, if every other variable is true, if your nutrition is on point, if you're getting enough sleep, if you have less stresses, any outside stretches apart from the gym are, true, now you could work past your last MRV in the next training cycle. Now, why would we implement the MRV concept of training? Well, the MRV can be a good indicator for how much work you have to put in. It also allows you to program your training in a clean, progressive, and organized way. Also, MRV concept of training is a good indicator for finding individual differences between athletes. Not every athlete's the same. So if you go online and you look up, the best 5-week transformation, and it's a training volume. Well, you don't know if that training is going to be enough for you to grow, or it's going to be too much. It's going to be too much, or it's going to be too little. That's why the MRV concept is so good, because you can make it your own and you can personalize it with your own training. Now, MRV is like this concept of training is used with a progressive overload, meaning the body must perceive as stress has new and above, which is accustomed to in order to change. So what are we doing? What are we changing from week to week, from microcycle to microcycle, so our body can have a new stimulus and stress? Well, we're upping up the volume. Now, once the body has adapted to intensity, that intensity will no longer stimulate new improvements. Now, what do? We increase the load, we increase the volume week to week until you can't recover anymore. What do? Like we said, we deload and we start over. Why? Because we can start over from a higher point and then increase our volumes through a new threshold that we've never hit before, and then continue to do that. So we analyze the current workload and then properly distribute the stress or duration of time the stress is being applied. This is, what week you did what volume, what other week you did this, what week you're gonna do a deload. It has following.